So, what really holds a modern empire together? I mean, is it just about military might? Or is there something else, something a little more subtle at play? Well, we're going to dive into a pretty provocative book today that argues the foundation of modern power isn't steel, it's stories. Here it is, right at the top: an empire maintained not by force alone, but by a system of political lies. That is the core claim from Charles Goyette's book, Empire of Lies. And, it really sets the stage for what we're about to unpack: how foreign policy is actually sold to us, the public. Okay, so an empire of lies. What are we really talking about here? Well, the book's central argument is pretty straightforward. It says the modern American empire, it isn't just propped up by its massive military or its economy. Nope. It's supposedly sustained by something way more subtle: a whole system of political manipulation that's built on these carefully managed narratives. And here's the really crucial part. According to the book, these stories, they're not just for show. They're specifically designed to get public consent for stuff, like foreign wars and interventions that we, the people, might otherwise say no way to. It's all about shaping our perception to make policy happen. All right, but how in the world could a system that massive actually function? Sounds pretty out there, right? Well, the book breaks it down. It argues that this whole thing rests on three core pillars, and they all work together to keep this so-called empire of lies going. So here are the three big ones. First, you need a system of permanent war. Second, the media has to switch from being a watchdog to more of a lapdog. And third, you have the classic danger of imperial overstretch. So let's break each one of these down one by one. So, pillar number one, this idea of permanent war. The thinking here is that for the system to keep itself going, war can't be just a rare exception. It has to become the norm. And to do that, you need a constant stream of new enemies, new threats, new justifications. Meanwhile, all the failures and the real costs of the last war, they get swept under the rug into what the book calls a memory hole, a place where inconvenient truths just disappear. And that brings us right to the second pillar: the media. See, in a healthy democracy, we think of the press as a watchdog, right? Its job is to hold power accountable. But the book argues that too often it becomes a lapdog. Instead of questioning, it just uncritically repeats the official talking points from the government, amplifies the narrative, and can even help frame anyone who disagrees as being unpatriotic. And the third pillar, well, this is a trap that so many empires have fallen into throughout history: imperial overstretch. It's this tendency for empires, from ancient Rome to Great Britain, to basically collapse because they spread themselves too thin. And the classic symptoms start to show up. Military spending just goes through the roof, national debt balloons, and you even see freedoms at home getting restricted to support all the expansion abroad. And all this leads to what is probably the book's most damning critique. The point isn't that you have a few specific politicians who lie. No, the argument is that the system itself requires lies to function. The lies are a feature, not a bug. Why? Because, the theory goes, if the public actually knew the full, unvarnished truth about the costs of permanent war, they'd never, ever support it. Now, as provocative as all this sounds, this idea actually isn't new at all. In fact, you could say Goyette's argument is just the latest chapter in a really long history of thinkers who saw this exact same pattern: that empires are built just as much on propaganda as they are on sheer power. I mean, people have been talking about this for over a century. You go back to 1909, you had Norman Angell pointing out that modern war was basically an economic illusion. Then, a couple of decades later, Edward Bernays, the father of modern PR, he wrote about how an invisible government engineers public consent. And then, after World War II, you have Hannah Arendt explaining how totalitarianism is built on a foundation of constant lies. It's like they all saw a different piece of the exact same puzzle. So, you see the common thread, right? It's pretty powerful. Of course, force and money matter. But the thing that truly mobilizes an entire population for war, the thing that sustains an empire through all its expensive adventures, it's the story it tells itself. That narrative, that's the real fuel for the machine. And this brings us to the final, and maybe the most important question that the whole book is really asking. If an empire truly runs on a system of lies, what's the end game? What is the ultimate consequence of that kind of cycle? Well, the book's assessment is pretty bleak, to be honest. The idea is that the empire gets trapped in this self-destructive loop. It has to keep creating new lies to justify the next war. The old lies, piff, they vanish down that memory hole we talked about. New stories are spun up, and this cycle, it doesn't just repeat. It gets faster and faster, becoming a sign of an empire basically eating itself from the inside out. And so we're left with that final haunting question posed by the book. What ultimately happens to a nation that depends on lies? It's a question that goes deep. It's about trust, about reality, and really about the future of the empire itself. And it definitely leaves you with a lot to think about.